Hi, Mash. How are you?
I'm well, Maya. How are you?
I'm doing well. Very happy to see you, and I'm very happy to have you as my guest for finding your niche for the Wicked series. And I've been wanting to interview you for a while now because um, you're doing a lot of amazing work. You're taking on some very challenging and tough cases that many other lawyers wouldn't want to touch. And I just want you to tell us a bit more about what you're doing, how you got into what you're doing, and from the beginning. So let's start by how did you start practicing criminal law and why did you get into criminal law?
So thank you for having me. I could advise you that I think I'm one of the lucky ones who actually knew what I wanted to do from a young age. I knew I wanted to go into law. But I especially liked criminal law. I didn't know anyone that did it. I didn't have anyone that could guide me through it, but I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And then once I started law school, I knew that criminal law was what I really, really wanted to do. The problem is, as you may know, it's very hard to get into criminal law, especially if you don't have people who can
Connections.
either
Yeah.
connections or parents who are judges,
Yeah.
lawyers, and what,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I actually came to Ottawa. I'm from Montreal originally, and I came to Ottawa because I got into the PAGE program. So at the House of Commons, and I ended up meeting a lot of people. A lot of the politicians were former lawyers as well. And I remember thinking I would never be able to do the legislative portion of
Yeah.
law. And I wanted to be able to practice. I loved um, helping people. So criminal law just seemed like the best of both worlds, right? You get to help people all the time, also go into court and litigate for the rights and make sure that, you're the gatekeeper. You make sure that the rights are protected as they should be. Um, and so when I started, I realized very quickly I had to make connections. So then you start cold calling. I started cold calling firms in Toronto here. And I actually was offered when I started cold calling, I cold called in the summer of my second year. So they weren't looking, they were most of the places were looking for articling students, not summer students. And eventually, someone in Toronto who wanted to offer me a position as an articling student said, well, why don't you call this firm in Ottawa and tell them I sent you? And that's how I got into working as a summer student, and I started making connections. And I realized it was really like I loved the work, and it was
Yeah.
absolutely the right place for me to be. Um, so yeah, that's how I got into it. It was literally cold calling, and I suspect when I originally cold called, they assumed that that person had sent me because I was a family member,
Okay.
and then they were also shocked because of my name. They thought I was going to be male.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a confusing first interaction if they met me, but it was really great, and I owe them me actually being able to get into the field. And what my articling principal is now one of our Ottawa judges. So I owe him a lot. I've learned a lot from him and many of my principals. And as you know, I've worked for another very big firm in
Yes.
Ottawa for 10 years. And I have been able to have that mentorship, which I'm lucky. A lot of people don't get to have mentorships such as that. But when I first got called to the bar, I also was a crown attorney out in L'Orignal in Cornwall. So I was able to see that aspect of it as
Yeah.
well. So, and my boss at the time was appointed as a Superior Court judge shortly thereafter. So it's just one of those situations where I got to learn from individuals, in my view, that are so extraordinary that they are then appointed to the bench. And I'm grateful for that, but I also appreciate it's not everyone's experience, right? A lot of times people who get into this criminal law have to do it on their own, either as a sole practitioner with
Yeah.
very little guidance, and it's extremely hard when you don't have that guidance for someone to show you ropes or give you your first clients or get you to like learn how to maneuver difficult personalities you might encounter, right?
Right. But now you're on your own. You have your own practice. You're running the show. So First of all, one thing that I do want to ask you about that, Timash, because I think a lot of lawyers do want to start working on their own, but they're afraid of that step. So tell us, how did you have that transition from working with a firm, a big firm in Ottawa, and now you decided to go on your own and you're, you now have kids. Do you regret that decision of going on your own? So tell us a bit more about that.
So it's terrifying. At any given
Yeah.
time when you start something new in your career, it's terrifying. Your first trial is terrifying. I still remember the first time I had to appear, like, and you feel the butterflies and you don't know what you're going to do, what the judge
Yeah.
is going to ask you. Your first bail hearing, your first appearance in court as a student, right? And so it was terrifying to leave the comfort of not having to deal with payroll and the law society aspects of things of running a practice and the insurance side and the monetary side and the financial sides.
Yeah.
Because lo and behold, like now I don't just get to deal with cases. I have to work on the side and deal with all the paperwork and the management
Business.
section.
Right.
Yeah, it's the business side, right? And like without the business side, especially in this day and age, especially with people Googling everything, you got to make sure your website's on point. You got to make sure you've got some sort of presence when it comes to searchability, right? But I'm very lucky. I'm not doing this on my own. I have an amazing team behind me. I've got amazing lawyers that work with me. I think you're going to be interviewing one of them
Yeah.
on Friday.
Yeah.
And I've got an amazing team now that basically I know that if I'm in a big case, I can depend on them with my eyes closed. They're going to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks. They're going to make sure that we uphold our reputation and that we're not going to miss things in court. And obviously mistakes happen, but like without them, I wouldn't be able to do what I do, which is very much something that I had to build in the past three years, right? 4 years almost. And I could tell you that when I left my firm, I came and took over a practice because the person was leaving to go to the Crown's office, and I had helped build the practice. So I brought my own clients and I
Yeah.
took over. I had to take over things that were not necessarily how I would have done things. So I
Mhm.
had I had to learn. And when I took over was in January 1st, 2020, 3 months before COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so it was a learning experience, to say the least, for everybody. But specifically, if you're starting your own practice and you now have to deal with Zoom, the
Yeah.
working from home, making sure that everything is dealt with. And we're lucky because the way that the practice had been set up was that every client file is electronically on a platform called Slack. So anytime someone on the team talks to a client or anything happens, it's in real time put in the client's channel. So let's say the client calls the office and says, "Oh, Mash said X, Y, and Z." That person's able to go and say, "That's not what she said," right? Like she's
Mhm.
updated it and that's not. But had it not been for that, it would have been a lot more difficult. And so that's how I came to take over the practice, and we've now grown enough that we have moved offices. We now are closer to the courthouse, and we've just moved actually a few months ago. So we're still kind of finding our bearings, but I'm lucky I have that team behind me to basically help me through everything that we had to go through. And I think going through all of these turbulences have actually helped us grow together, because we very quickly had to learn how to get through an audit with the Law Society
Yeah.
within like a year of being on our own, right? So yeah, so that's why that's how I came about to having my own practice. Would I suggest it during COVID to anybody else? Absolutely not.
Well,
But
without COVID,
it's
because I hope, yeah,
yeah,
but
it's sink or swim, right? And you have to realize there's benefits to running your own practice, but there's also a lot of downsides, right? And as defense counsel, I mean, we can never really take vacation, right? When you're a
right.
crown, you can take vacation. They're not your clients, but as a defense, it's your clients, and if they can't talk to you, then
Yeah.
they might leave,
Yeah.
right? And especially as women, I mean, a lot of people in defense work just basically go to Crown's office when they are pregnant and have children, because it's hard. I got lucky in a sense that it was during COVID And COVID was a blessing in disguise in the sense that it kind of forced the courts to modernize.
Right.
And we all remember how it was in the past, right? I remember when they would literally drag boxes and boxes and boxes of paper files into court, and the Crown would be like flipping through the files, and they had like 5 staff helping them. And then when they switched to the electronic scope, even then it was like a lot of the old timers it was very difficult to explain to them how things were done. But now it's normal, right?
Yeah.
Like, that since you've been a lawyer, it's always been scope. And then, but that's the thing, right? The Crown's office kind of modernized, but the courts hadn't. And then when COVID hit, everyone had to deal with Zoom for the
Yeah.
first time. We all learn how to call in, but it also allowed people like me who wouldn't have otherwise had any semblance of a mat leave to be able to work from home and still spend time with their child.
Yeah.
Which, as I said, it's a blessing in disguise. I had a lot of other very horrible things happen during COVID, but I see those as blessings, because in our line of work, like, especially since I've started, I've seen so many defense counsel, especially women, leave the practice to go work for the Crown's office because it has benefits. It's got situation where you have healthcare, you've got mat leave,
Yeah.
and you have a vacation that's actually a vacation, not okay, I'm just not in the office, but I still have to answer emails. I still have to do that, right? You got to love it. And I think we discussed this before we started the interview, is if you can get up in the morning and even on your most horrible day, not attribute what the horrible day is to your work, you're very lucky. Like, I love what I do. I love the people I work with. And look, there's difference in personalities. I'm not saying everyone gets along with everyone all the time, but I know that our job is important, just the same way the Crown's job is important, just the same way the police officer's job is important. But our job is of utmost importance in the sense that we are the least paid,
Yeah.
the least appreciated. We are usually the people that, if anyone ever talks about, oh, how do you defend criminals? Why would you ever want to do that? And I've taught classes where that's the first question the students ask,
Yeah.
right? And it's just because a lot of times people are on this ivory tower where they've never had to deal with a situation where a family member or someone close to them was accused, either rightfully so or wrongfully so, to have to deal with how that feels, and how in those situations where you're at your worst, you need someone who's in your corner, who's not going to judge you, who's going to be straight with you and tell you how things are without sugarcoating it. And basically defend your rights. It doesn't matter if you're guilty or you're not guilty.
Yeah.
It comes down to whether or not the evidence that was found in a legal way, and that in
And
court,
the process is fair. Yeah.
exactly. And that's all anyone could ask for. It's a fair process. If you're found guilty for a fair process, then democracy
Then
works.
system is working. Yes.
System's working. And we're not there to basically have people acquitted at any cost. That's absolutely not what we have to do. We know this. And I sometimes I have to explain that to the general public, is we have rules, like what you see on TV and on series and stuff. If I went into court and started yelling at the judge the way you see on some of these American shows, like, you're going to be very, very, very disappointed in your trial. You're going to be bored because you're not allowed to. And at the end of the day, it's my practice, and that's how I teach everybody that I've ever had to teach, is no client is worth your reputation. No client is worth you losing that trust that you're not going to mislead someone. And your reputation is everything, especially as a young lawyer. A lot of times that's what people forget, is it takes one mistake. It will follow you throughout your whole career. Right? If you're disrespectful one time, people tend to forget the good and remember the negatives. And I think it is important at the end of the day to remember that you have a role to play. You don't need to be rude about it, but you also don't have to be a pushover about it. And a lot of times, especially I find, and I will specifically speak about younger lawyers, younger defense lawyers, and mostly women, a lot of times I find that it's an adversarial system, and
Yeah.
sometimes there's a lot of yelling that happens at the younger lawyers, and oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Fine, you want to do this, and like threats, right? And I've never done well with threats. You want to threaten me? Cool, let's go to trial, right? It's ultimately a situation where it comes down to the client's instructions, obviously, but just because the louder the bark does not necessarily mean the bigger the bite, right? And a lot of times I find that sometimes a party may try to use their voice and the way they communicate with a younger lawyer in a sense to try to establish superiority.
Yeah.
And when it comes down to actual experience, I don't find that appropriate at all. I mean, we've seen the turnaround just in the Crown's office in Ottawa of how many young individuals come and
Right.
go and come and go. At the end of the day, like I always am very respectful in my dealings with no matter who they are. I never try to belittle them because they're only a junior Crown. But I've had the reverse where they don't know who I am and they don't know that I've been doing this for 14, 15 years. And when they're speaking to me, it's on this level of, well,
Who are
clearly you
you?
don't know what,
Yeah.
yeah, which is entertaining to me because you never know who's on the other line, on the other side of the phone. And that's since COVID, right? Because before we used to have these meetings either in person,
Yeah.
and back in the days, I used to have them in the office of the Crowns, right? Like you would go
Right.
in each in offices and have these meetings. And so it was a lot more, it's a lot harder to be disrespectful. You're not when you're face to face than if you're on the phone and you don't know the person.
Exactly.
And I've always made it a point when even when I speak to, like, I've always told everyone who works here as well is you remain respectful, even if they're not, just don't sink to that level. If you don't agree, you don't agree. Set a JPT. Like,
Yeah.
it's a situation. There's always a solution to whatever the issues are. You're
But
gonna
But I
have
want to
that, right?
ask you here because you're actually raising an interesting point because we do feel a difference now since COVID that we have less of a relationship between the crowns and the judges because it seems like even before, um, like you mentioned that you used to have CPTs in the crown's office. Like when before COVID, I remember we had CPTs, not necessarily in the actual Crown's office, but there was an office in the Crown, the general office, where you would go and meet them, and you would get to build some kind of relationship with the Crowns. And with time, you become friends with some of them, and that makes like negotiations much easier. Now we don't have that. It's all on the phone. Some crowns, I sometimes suggest Zoom CPTs. Some crowns like it, and others are like, no, phone. And then it's very difficult to build that relationship with the crowns and with the judges. So what is your take on that? Like, how can new lawyers who have never experienced that, how can they foster relationships with the crowns and the and judges? It's very difficult, I find now, to do that.
So, I agree it's difficult. The only thing is if I mean, there's situations where there's meet and greets or things like that. They don't have them as much anymore
Yeah.
here, but it would be helpful for the junior lawyers to go. The only thing I could say, I always had a rule, and it's my rule, and I'm not saying it's the right rule.
Yeah.
Just because I had to work very hard to get where I am. I never had someone to kind of say, oh, that's my dad, that's my mom, like. And I always, from the get-go, was of the view that nothing good happens after, for example, your principal leaves. And my principal was Richard Adelman. So I worked for Rico for years. And if we went to a swearing-in party or if we went to a Christmas thing that was for the courthouse, when Rico left at 7, I left.
Mm.
Nothing good comes out of after that. But during the time that you're there, you communicate, you say hi, you build rapport in that sense. And obviously, like I'm not discrediting people who want to stay out late and do stuff and party, I just am of the view, I don't drink around colleagues as much. I'm very careful, especially now, like back when you're younger, you do things, but I've always been very careful because I know how fragile your reputation is.
Mhm.
And I'm not, and I want to be very clear is I'm not judging anybody who decides to do and engage in any activities past when their articling principal or their principal leaves, not articling, but your big boss, right?
Right.
But I knew that as long as I was there when he was there, there could not be anything said about my actions and what I did. And it still didn't make me, it put me in a position where I could also be with him, who he has so many years of experience and a respect
Yeah.
that certain individuals gave him. Then he would introduce me, and that's how I got to know a lot of people, as well as the rest of the firm, as well as the rest of the people that I ended up encountering. But one of the biggest things, and this is a little segue, is as a young lawyer, it's so easy to go into court and forget that the most important people in that court are the clerks and the
Mhm.
staff. And when you
True.
are respectful to them, they will go above and beyond to assist
That
you
is so true. That's
if
so
your case
true.
is there. And that's a lot of things that people don't remember is just because you have a law degree doesn't make you better than someone else.
Right.
It just means that you made different choices in life and or you had different opportunities in life.
Mhm.
And I always, and I know I'm not really answering your question right now, but once the segue is, I remember one thing from my law school. Our dean, I remember, said when we were all sitting down, and he said, "Look to your right, look to your left." And usually it's look to your right, look to your left. One of you won't be here by the end. And he said, "Look to your right, look to your left. You're all going to end up. The only reason you're all here is because of the opportunities you had in life, and not because you're better than anybody else."
Mhm.
And that has stuck with me over like 17 years. And it's true because it goes the same way with, in my view, anybody looking at anything should look at it. Just because you're a crown doesn't make you better than a defense counsel. Just because you're a defense counsel doesn't make you better than a crown. Just because you're a judge doesn't make you better than everybody else. We all had different opportunities in life, and that's where our clientele in defense law changes. A lot of the times the clients are before us because of one choice they made in life. Either it being a party they were at, they decided to try crack, or they and then it changed their lives.
Right.
Or they had an accident, they got hooked on Oxycontins, or they got in an argument, and instead of walking away, they decided to engage, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make them any less worthy of the respect. And that's where it comes down to lawyers I've seen lawyers that are very junior, and it's because they have this mentality that we are lawyers. We're lawyers, but we're still human. If you cut us, we all bleed the same color. It doesn't matter if the person is black, blue, green, yellow, believes in and like worships a cow or doesn't believe
Yeah.
in God.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's where our humanity needs to come in. And lawyers need to, especially young lawyers, need to be humble when they're going in, because we all have had to be humble and learn from our elders,
Right.
learn from not only their mistakes, but learn from their guidance. And I still make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. And the moment you think you're above it, and unfortunately, I think a lot of these junior lawyers that are coming in, because they have gone through either schooling through Zoom or through just very distant interactions with people over screen or over phone, they forget that when you're in person, things need to be different, right?
Mm.
That animosity that you think is wrongfully appropriate in any given circumstance, you need to kind of remember that at some point down the line, you may need something from that defense counsel, either an admission or some kind of situation where you're stuck in another trial and you need them to adjourn something. Where if you're going to be perceived as being someone who's unbearable to deal with, that defense counsel may say, you know what? No,
Yeah.
that's a you problem. You overbooked yourself. I'm not going to assist you in this. And
Mhm.
you can fall on your sword and then have to go upstairs and explain why. And that's why I always try to be respectful. And of course, sometimes it's hard because you get people with a lack of savoir vivre, as
Yeah.
they say in French.
Yeah.
But always remember that your interactions, especially by email, need to always be written as if they will one day be filed with the court. And you don't want to go in there and say, you know, you're being this and that and that. No, don't ever do that in writing. Don't ever do that in person. Like, you're not going to teach an old dog new tricks.
Mhm.
You always remember where you're coming from, but also remember you are there as a member of the bar. You are there to uphold the justice system for your clients. And the last thing you need is for people to say, oh, you're a lawyer, you're a liar. Like, obviously you're going to lie. And I could tell you only how I run my practice is I always have 3 rules when my clients call. And I say, if you're a new client, I have 3 rules. You don't follow them, I'm dropping you as a client. One of them being, you change your number. I'm the first person to know. I don't care if
Yeah.
you have a side chick,
Yeah.
you have a mom. I don't care. I am the first person because I don't
Yeah.
want to have to and try to search for you. Secondly, you're respectful. You call here, I'm not there. If I hear that you were disrespectful to any of my staff, I drop you. I don't care how much money you bring in because I depend on my team to be able to do the work I do. And if you're disrespectful to them, you're directly disrespectful to me. And I am at a point in my career where I don't need to deal with that.
Yeah.
And then thirdly is don't lie to me. I won't ask you questions I don't want answers to. But when I ask you a specific question, don't lie to me. And usually clients are like, oh, yeah, no problem. And then down the line, they realize that I'm very strict about those rules, right? The moment I feel that you've lied to me because I can't do my job if you're not telling me the truth, and then we get into trial and suddenly something comes out
Yeah.
that you haven't told me about. And then like, I can't do my job. You're paying me to do my job to help you, but you're not helping me help you. So I think that's basically what I would say is, so basically always be respectful in all your interactions. Let them be the disrespectful ones. Don't sink to their level, because at the end of the day, people will see. Like they'll like the other members, the judge, everyone else will see if they're being snarky towards you. And I could tell you, it is hard because sometimes you're boiling on the inside
Yeah.
with things that are said, and you have to continuously still be like, and of course we all know when you say respectfully, Your
Yeah.
Honor, no, it's like the most disrespectful thing you could say, respectfully.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it comes down to it's your reputation, and always remember that you're there because of the work you've done, but also because of the opportunities you got.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a child of I'm a refugee. I came here when I was 2, and I could see people back home that don't have the women back home that don't have that freedom. They wouldn't be able to speak their minds the way I am, right? So at the end of the day, it all comes down to the opportunities I got. And I'm very grateful. And that's why I keep harping on the opportunities, is because a lot of people, it doesn't make me any smarter. It just means that I got those opportunities to be where I am in life and love what I do, thankfully, but it's an opportunity game, right?
But Mash, let's talk a little bit about your background since you mentioned that you're a refugee. So where are you originally from? And I know you speak several languages, so maybe you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I was born in Iran, and I immigrated here when I was 2, so around there. And I've lived here since. So I grew up in Quebec, and therefore I was very happily forced to go to school in French. So I'm francophone before I'm anglophone. I learned English in CEGEP. So I learned English when I was like 18, 19. And I speak Farsi, I speak French, and I speak English. So, and I'm grateful for that because I could assist clients who speak either Farsi or Dari. And I know Maya, you also speak Arabic. So,
Yes.
and I mean, one of the biggest things is when you have cases where you have clients that you understand the dialect of, and then you're watching this police interview and the interpreter they brought in who's not accredited is suddenly
Mhm.
like changing things like, oh, this person was bothering me, and then they're interpreting with, oh, he assaulted her,
Yeah,
and the person's charged with assault until you get to trial, and you're like, that's not even the word that you used,
yeah.
right? And I think now looking back, I'm very grateful that my mom forced me to speak Farsi at home, because while I can't read and write, I'm able to communicate with not only Persian clients, but Dari speaking Afghani clients or anyone who speaks some dialect of Farsi. But I think it's a blessing because it's a portion that you wouldn't necessarily have if the person didn't have a lawyer that speaks the language they speak.
Well, and that's huge, right? Because sometimes the clients do want to speak directly to their lawyers in the language, in their own language. So I find the fact that we're able to communicate with some clients without the need for an interpreter is really very important because, as you mentioned, sometimes the interpreters don't necessarily interpret things the right way, and it might have an impact on your relationship with your clients. So it's a huge advantage, and I know that you're I mean, just like me, you do trials in French as well. So that's also a big thing to your practice that you're able to represent clients both in French and English.
The only thing I would add for younger lawyers, if you're going to have a case where you're going to have an interpreter, you need to make sure they are fully accredited,
Mhm.
because there
Yeah.
are so many times where they're partially accredited, and then that's going to be a problem in appeal purposes, right? If ever they see that. So always at the outset, make sure that you're asking for a fully accredited. And when you're starting when they're about to like swear in the interpreter, just make sure on the record they say they are fully accredited in the language that you need. I've had situations where the person basically said they were accredited in another language, but they
But
were
not
partially,
the
yeah.
one.
So it's just a little tidbit. I think it's very important because it will save you an appeal situation where
Yeah.
you basically drop the ball because you didn't ensure that your client's language rights were respected.
That's actually very good and important advice for practicing lawyers. And I know you gave a lot of tips on on the practice of criminal law. But what I do want to touch upon, Mash, with you is the types of cases that you do, because you do. I know when we were preparing for this interview, you mentioned that you do some human trafficking cases. You also do biker cases, which is also very interesting. So we won't get into the cases and the facts of the cases, but just like how is it that you got into these niche areas? Because it's very difficult to get these types of cases, and not a lot of lawyers, even if they have the opportunity to have these cases, not many want to do, especially human trafficking, because they can be very draining and intense. Bikers maybe are a bit more exciting because it's like it's a little bit what we see in the movies. And so people are attracted to the mafia, the bikers. But human trafficking is a little bit different. The facts can be more disturbing for some lawyers. So maybe if you can just tell us a little bit about these niche areas, how you got into them, and the challenges that you may have noticed while practicing in these areas.
So I'll start with human trafficking, and I haven't had one in a couple of in a little while, but I did three cases, and two of which went to the Superior Court, and both were acquittals. But a few years ago, there was a change in the legislation
Mhm.
over prostitution laws.
Yeah.
Obviously, I won't go into them, but basically, what happened is a special task force was made in Ottawa, which dealt with human trafficking, the HT group. And what happened is we saw this like rise in situations where individuals that otherwise would have not been arrested in the past or would have been arrested for smaller charges are now being charged with human trafficking.
Mhm.
And obviously these opinions are they're my opinions, but what I would say is we saw this rise in women who were on Backpage, for example, and suddenly the police would go there and say, "Oh, you clearly wouldn't want to do this yourself. So who's forcing you?"
Mhm.
Taking away the view that, some of these women chose to work in the sex industry. And within their rights. It's their body. They're doing what they want to do. But there was a lot of pressure of, we'll get you the help, we'll get you the programs, we'll get you this, but you got to give us someone's name, or you got to tell us. So I got fairly lucky in the sense that the cases that I had were situations that, it's not like situations we see where the person's like trafficked over
Yeah.
country lines and whatnot, but it was a situation where, in one case, for example, the girl decided willingly, because she was bored, to get into Backpage for a month. And this is a person that was from a affluent, like a well-off family that lived in a nice neighborhood. So when the police encountered her, it was a situation where it wasn't their typical victim.
Mm-hmm.
And the client was a Black client, an African client. So it was this subconscious bias of, well, clearly he's using you, clearly this. So my client was arrested, and he was an international student, and they decided to arrest him. They knew where he lived. They never asked him to come in. They decided to arrest him at the immigration office when he was going in for his immigration meeting with Immigration Canada.
Wow.
So needless to say, his life got overthrown within like the span of 5 minutes, and
Yeah.
he was no longer allowed to go to the Ottawa U, because Ottawa U has certain rules about he couldn't leave the country because of his conditions. He was in the country illegally, so therefore it was just a horrible situation. And what came out of it is that, because of, just in my view, the dynamics, the investigations was almost done with blinders on, where they took her word as fait acquis. And what happened is there was a lot of Snapchat issues, and it ended up being a Superior Court case. And that Superior Court case, I got very lucky that my clients had the Snapchats from his girlfriend at the time, who was this complainant's best friend. So it all came out that it was just a situation where he had left her
Mm-hmm.
and decided to start another relationship. And it was this, oh, I never wanted to do this. I never wanted to do that. And she got caught in her own lies, and things came out. But this guy's life is ruined now.
Yeah.
And that's where I say, sometimes when you look at the charge, it's a horrible charge. But when you actually start peeling away the layers, it all came down to this horrible situation where a Black man had to now prove that he wasn't human trafficking a woman. And he was acquitted, but there's no repercussions on the other end.
Right.
And as I said, I've had a few of these cases where situations have been different, but I found them very interesting, and not because I think human trafficking is good. I don't think anyone should ever be trafficked in any type of way. But at the end of the day, again, our role is to ensure that the Crown proves their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Because without us, it would be chaos.
Right.
And it could be, and that's when I explain it to people, is it could be your brother, it could be your father. Like, if someone just came and said, your dad raped me, do you want your dad to be convicted without a trial? No, because you are of the view that, no, he prove it, because I know my dad, I don't think he did it. But until people are put in that situation where it's a close person to them, it's always going to be, well, it will never happen to me. And I think that's why the human trafficking thing was so interesting for me, because at the beginning I was like, I'm never going to touch that. I'm never going to do the cases. And then I got thrown into one within 2 days, because another lawyer in my firm couldn't do it. So I got given the file on Friday, and it was a long weekend. And on Tuesday, I was starting a 10-day SCJ trial. And I've always been of the view as, well, I could either panic or get to work, right? And it ended up being an acquittal, right? And interestingly enough, it was again another situation where, it was not black and white the way the synopsis made it seem. And at the end of the day, the judge found in favor of the client, and that was one where they had him in the hospital bed, tied up, confessing to things on record, right? And I think for younger lawyers, one of the things is don't always just take the synopsis as it is, because sometimes when you actually look at the disclosure, you look at the evidence, it's not ever what the synopsis says.
And it's a point of view, right? At the end of the day, the synopsis is a point of view. It's not fact. So, and that's why our job is to challenge what is in the synopsis. But there's an interesting point that you made here, Mash, is that sometimes some types of cases, they may sound or seem to be difficult or disturbing, but then once you actually read the case, it doesn't turn out to be as bad as it may seem to be. Like this human trafficking case, you said that as you started, diving more into the case, you just realized that, like it wasn't as disturbing as it might, at first sound. And so this is maybe something as well that lawyers should be mindful of, that they shouldn't be afraid necessarily because of the nature of the charges of the case or what it seems like in the synopsis, because it may actually not be as bad as it first appears.
Yeah, but that being said, Maya, every person needs to know their limit. When I
Right.
was articling, I was given and this was back in the days before the new rules that are very well needed, where I had to look over some child porn disclosure, and at that point they were giving us the child porn to watch on our own screens and stuff. And I remember, I distinctly remember because I had to call two of my fellow articling students, and I was in a depression for 3 days. I could not eat. I could not, like, I just wanted to forget.
Mm-hmm.
And I told myself, I now know my limit. So that is something no matter how difficult it is or what, I can't do it, because I don't want to be in a position where I'm putting my views and biases, and it's like I said, people can be completely innocent, but I am not able to watch the disclosure of child porn and
Mm-hmm.
not take it home,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if you know your limit and you're able to set that limit for yourself, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
But it's when you think you have to do everything just because. Everyone needs to know that at some point your mental health is important. And there's some people that are able to disconnect that portion of it with what it is. I'm not. So it's a situation where we are and that's where I say it's take your cases, don't not take cases because you think they're difficult, but know your limits. And
Right.
that's
And
pretty
that's very important advice. But what about the biker cases? Because I know you're involved in these types of cases. So how did you get into that? And what are they different from other criminal cases? Are there specific challenges that you face when you're taking on a biker case?
um I never just it was I've been kind of, it's interesting because I only thought about it because you mentioned it, but I wasn't even unique for me. It's just I had clients that I had assisted in the past on other charges unrelated to anything involving bikers and whatnot. And eventually I created a rapport. I've been their lawyers over a number of years, and then they got involvements with situations that may lead to charges of it being biker association. And then what happens is that because of my association with these individuals, they started referring me out to other members of the club. And they just so happen to now have multiple charges before the
Yeah.
court. And it's going to be interesting because there's biker clubs and criminal organization.
Right.
And I don't represent anyone in the criminal organizations.
Mhm.
I represent people, members of clubs. And when I say criminal organization, there are some biker organizations that have been established in common law through or civil law, well, yeah, common law through either the Quebec courts or the other levels of courts that have established that this one particular biker group is a criminal organization.
Right.
So currently we have a case where it involves one club and one that is considered a criminal organization. And what the Crown has done, they've separated them. So everyone from the members of one club is being prosecuted by one Crown, and then the others that are part of this other motorcycle club are being prosecuted by another Crown. So it's going to be interesting, but honestly, it's no different than a big drug case where you have to go through the ITOs, you have to go through whether or not you're bringing a Garofoli, whether or not you're going to have motions, whether or not there's charters. And as long as you look at a case and you don't look at it for what it is, like who's charged, and just kind of go to the basics of, okay, it's a search incident to arrest. Yes, okay, this is how I proceed. It's a warrantless search. Here's how I proceed. When you break it down, any case, as hard as it might be, when you come back to the basics, it's not difficult.
Right.
And as long as you don't get overwhelmed by like, I'm not someone who speaks to the media. I'm very much someone, like, even doing this interview, I was reluctant. I don't ever speak, right? I've had an experience in, like, as a very junior lawyer where someone asked me a question and then completely changed something. And I was like, you know what, I don't need to talk. And at the end of the day, and it's my view that if you want to get your name out, you also have to put your client's name out. And no one's ever going to say, oh, what a great thing that this person was acquitted of human trafficking, for example, right?
Right.
I don't need your name to come back on a Google search because they're going to try to get a job for what? For me to get my name out? I'm okay. I know that my work speaks for itself, and I know that clients will word of mouth. And that's one of the other things, it's word of mouth, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's exactly what got into the biker crew, is it's word of mouth of just knowing that I do the work because I love it, not because I want to get my name in the newspaper. So I think that for that reason, when you're dealing with situations in high profile cases, I don't ever tell anyone that I'm dealing on a high profile case or on something that's a murder or something, because I have murders, I have manslaughters, but I just kind of deal with it within the team that we have. It's a great team, and like, if you have frustrations, I'm lucky I get to, like, air my frustrations out with my team members. But at the same time, like, we do our work. It's a job, and we're there to work for our clients and not there for our own benefit, right? We're not there to get recognition. Recognition for what? For being a defense counsel. Like, so what if my name is not in the newspaper? I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Well, and you also mentioned something that your work will speak for itself. And I mean, you're pretty known in Ottawa and the East region for your work, that you're a very good defense lawyer, and that you're very fierce, and you will really aggressively advocate for your clients. And so, as you said, it's not going to be lost on people. And at the end of the day, it's the clients who should know that. And I think your clients all know that you're good, because that's why they keep referring you to other people they know.
I appreciate that.
All right, Mash. Well, I don't want to take much of your time. I know we had a very nice and long discussion, and you actually gave a lot of really good advice for a lot of new lawyers. And I think a lot of lawyers will appreciate the advice that you gave in this interview. And I know you're very busy. I'm very happy that we finally got to record this interview. And I wish you the best of luck. And I hope we'll get to interview you again in the future and talk more. Maybe once the cases are over, we can talk a bit more about some of the things about the cases.
And absolutely. And thank you, Maya, for having me. I could just say, if I could just leave one thing for the junior lawyers, always feel free to reach out to senior counsel. Like, and senior counsel should know better than to be dismissive, because at the end of the day, we all were in the situation of younger lawyers, and we should pay it forward. So I'll say for defense counsel, like, if you have questions, always ask a senior counsel, because sometimes you don't get guidance where you are. And our doors are always open if if the counsel want to call. Like, I'm not always going to have availabilities right that moment, but I mean, that's the whole point of this job, is you pay it forward for the next generation to be able to advocate, because as I said, we're losing so many of our younger
Yeah.
lawyers to the Crown's office, right? Or to
Yeah.
other jobs because of just how difficult it is.
Yeah.
So that's all I'll say, is always ask, and like, don't just think that any question is stupid, because yeah, it might be stupid at that moment, but if you make that mistake 5 years from now in front of a judge, that's when it's gonna, the judge is gonna say something to you. But just ask. There's never, ever anything that's beneath anybody to answer.
Yeah. That's very
Thank you
good
for having.
advice. Thank you for your time, Mash.
Have a good day.
You as well.